Tired already. So we got the last presentation of today. And actually the first one with video games, so it should be quite unique for today. And I'm sure it's going to be very interesting. So the name is Jenna Matters. What is the money in mobile gaming? Martin Macmillan, Pollen VC, CEO and founder.
Cool. Thank you for the introduction. Let's give a little background on Pollen. So the key reason we do lots of these conference topics is really to try and help mobile gaming studios improve their overall financial literacy. So very often the studios are run and the finances are handled originally by the founders before they hire in CFOs and finance leads early on. And as a result, sometimes kind of critical pieces are missed kind of early on. So we provide a lot of, time, tools, support, and so on, trying to raise the overall financial literacy. Our business is a lending business to gaming studios and app businesses. So we provide non-dilutive lending capital to gaming studios to help them scale without diluting their equity. So it's a debt-based model that's linked against their receivables and residuals to allow them to scale faster. And generally, we sit alongside either angels or venture capital funds as providing sort of debt and equity as part of the overall capital mix. But the thing we're really here to talk about today is to try and give you some food for thought around some of the financial topics around, particularly where this idea of where the money is. And some of that's just based on sort of empirical view of what we're seeing in the market. We talk to hundreds and hundreds or probably thousands of studios every year. So we have reasonable kind of insights into what's going on. So I'm gonna keep it simple. I'm gonna tell this particular story through a well-known fairy tale, but changing the narrative a bit. So once upon a time, we have an ambitious mobile gaming founder called Goldilocks. Everyone knows Goldilocks. So she wants to get into mobile gaming, but she doesn't know what type of games to build. What genre of games should she be building? So she's trying to figure out, against these sort of like, obviously there's many more genres than this, but she's looking at what sort of genre and where the right sort of porridge is at. So first of all, she has a little taste of the hyper casual porridge bowl, and she was seeing like loads of money being made, arguably more a couple of years ago than now, and she saw some big exits, not obviously of hyper casual studios, but of hyper casual publishers. So she didn't quite figure that out, but her issue there once she tried hyper casual was she couldn't knock out hyper casual hit after hit after hit. As a studio, you just can't do that. It's just stacked against you. And making games that were just serving crappy ads to kids didn't make her feel great about herself either. So she put the spoon down and she went on to merge games. So lots of talk, lots of VC funding going into merge games. They had long LTVs, so people would play for a long time. They wouldn't just toss it away after 7 days or 30 days or whatever. And she'd also heard that the VCs like the idea of building games with long lifetime values. So they they could raise lots of money at crazy valuations, again, possibly slightly in the past these days. But as far as she could figure out, whilst the games themselves were relatively simple, they just consumed loads and loads of VC funding until eventually, because the cost of the ads was so big, eventually after 9 months or maybe a year, they would start to break even. And that just struck her as a long time. And then what happened is the VCs got back to the house, right? So they'd been out scouting for, opportunities for years. Anyone that had a good idea for a mobile game, sure, let's, here's a bunch of money. And they'd raised all this money from all these eager limited partners saying, yeah, we want to get into gaming because that's the latest big thing. And they just had a sense that everything wasn't really right. And after 15 years of everything being up and to the right, they could just tell it wasn't. And and right enough, the bear market set in. So from a VC point of view, the market was forcing them to be more diligent with their cash. It wasn't just a spray and pray, hey, anyone with a good idea for a oil game can raise loads of cash. And they also realized that a decent chunk of their funds, a decent chunk of this limited partner money was just going into buying Facebook and Google ads. And everyone is focused on 100% ROAS, not really thinking that's just where you've paid Facebook or Google or TikTok enough to pay for the ad, right? No one's eaten, no one's had any porridge until Facebook or Google have had their porridge. So it's forcing them to rethink things a bit. So when she really thought about it, she wanted to build games in a genre that was not too short that it wasn't sustainable, but not too long that it was just focusing. It was just taking so much in this case, capital or whatever oats to get the right recipe. So she was determined she was going to focus on something that was just right. Wasn't too long, wasn't too short. So she set herself the idea of building games in a genre where instead of just building games she loved because she was passionate about a particular sector, she was going to be a little bit more kind of forensic about it and figure out what genres can I build games in that I can actually make a decent profit and break even, where it's not going to use so much capital it's going to take years, but it's not going to be so kind of like one and done as hyper casual. So she set herself the 60 to 180 day target. And of course, everyone lived happily ever after. The takeaway from it is try and build games in a genre where you can actually make money. It's very easy to get, in a creative sector, to build games that in a sector you're passionate about. You love this genre, that, but and that's fine if you just want to make games as a hobby or something. But if you want to make it your business, and ultimately, if you ever want to build a business that you can actually sell, you need to start more from first principles, thinking, what sort of games are we going to build here? Where can we actually make money? And it's all about making a decent return in a reasonable time frame. And again, these numbers are obviously variable, but a hyper casual game, you may have been looking at one end of the spectrum. You may have said, I can break even on my 20 cent or 25 cent ad spend in 5 days, and I'm going to make a 120% ROAS. I'm going to make my money and then make a 20% return at the end of month one. And then you go through all the other genres and everything's peculiar, and you can't pigeonhole everything, and you get right up to merge games and through to social casino games where people are, the break-even horizons for the games are so long, it can be like a year, more than a year and a half, but people will be expected to play them for years and years and years. You just got to figure out what the spectrum is, but also then what the rewards are. We're going to come back to that in a second. So what we figured out, and this is just purely our own musings, right? This isn't anything that's done with more than our own kind of view of the market, is a sweet spot. And this is some of our customers. There's lots of people we talk to trying to get a break even between 60 and 180. Arguably, you could say 60 and 120 days, but some categories it just takes a little bit longer. And the balance here is break even and actually making some money with longevity of the franchise. It doesn't require crazy amounts of money to scale. Every time I would open a TechCrunch or VentureBeat and read about some company in Turkey raising 20 or 30 or $50 million, it was a massive faceplant because you knew it was just all going into user acquisition for the latest puzzle game or whatever. And then third, if you can introduce some debt into your capital mix, so you don't have to fund the whole lot with equity, and if the time frames are shorter, then you've got more options in terms of financing it. Right, true story. I was in Warsaw last year, and I'm standing at a gaming conference not dissimilar to this, around one of those high tables, with 2 UA managers. First UA manager says, I'm making 130% ROAS. The second UA manager says, I'm making 140% ROAS. So I noodle on it for a second. None of them are talking about genre or time or anything else. It's just this pure fixation on ROAS. How much more than my ad spend do I make? So I'm thinking to myself, okay, how long is it taking you to make this mystical 130% ROAS? Is it a week? Is it a month, 6 months, 1 year? There was no wiring for time. He wasn't really thinking about his timeframes. That was, different department, finance or whatever. So kind of got me thinking there, time really matters. Like, what kind of time frame are you buying over? Because this is just an investment decision, right? You are an investment manager. You're just investing cash to get a return. So you should be looking at it through the same lens as any other kind of investor. You should be looking at it, not this sort of mythical ROAS thing, which is some KPI to tick a box internally. So if I pull up the typical cohort type of thing, you've got, you spend the money day one, and then you gradually recoup it. And that's a convex curve. Typically, you recoup a little bit quicker to start with, and then it flattens off over time. And at some point, you've got to figure out where you want to call it. You can't have this go on for like years and years and years. You figure out, okay, I reckon I'm 90% done or 80 or whatever at this point. And that's when I'm going to sort of call my LTV. So you're basically underwater, then you come up and hopefully you break even. And only then do you start to make a profit. So we came up with and this isn't intended to be perfect, but this is intended to be like a slightly crude, but very easy to calculate metric called monthly ROI. And it's intended to just basically give you a loose framework to get you thinking more about timing and genre and all that good stuff. So again, looking at it through the lens of an investment manager. So you've got your hyper casual example, 20 cents invested after day 5 gets you a 24% return. Doesn't seem big in terms of sort of dollars and cents. So you're making this profit. So you're turning your 20 cents into 24 cents, but you're doing it in 30 days. So on a monthly basis, you've achieved a monthly return on capital of 20%. If you could do that every month, you would have ignoring compounding, you'd have a 240% return on capital. So talk to any hedge fund manager, they're going to be pretty happy with that kind of return. The problem is it's very hard to do that repeatedly, but that's more of a genre thing. Then you look at the kind of something more in mid-core. So let's say you got a $3 acquisition cost, because guess what? Google and Facebook are pretty good at knowing what the LTVs are going to be, and miraculously the price in the quote unquote auction rises to take most of the corn off the table. So let's say you're turning $3 into $4.20 in 360 days. So over that, you're making a 40% return on an annualized basis, pretty good. But when you actually divide it by 12, which is the simplistic way of doing it, you should take into account what the curve actually looks like. But if you just assumed it was linear, you said you've got a monthly return down at 3.3% versus a hyper casual at 20, but it's more sustainable because people are playing and paying for longer. And then you look at the sort of mythical merge and puzzle games, which are obviously super fashionable, maybe arguably a little bit less so once people have started to figure this out. So you've got a $5 acquisition cost because the platforms are really good at knowing that you're going to play this for a year or 2 years or whatever. So amazingly, the price of the ads, install ads increases. So let's say you're turning $5 into 8. So you've got a lifetime return on your investment of 60%, but on an annualized basis, it's 30% per year. And on a monthly basis, it's down at 2.5% per month. So only when you start to think about this and sort of like you visualize the lifetime and then the returns on the basis that you can think about it on something you can compare, right? So what we're trying to get to is a scenario where you've got $1 to invest. What kind of UI do you want to invest in? Do you want to invest it in your hyper casual and make 20? Or do you want to invest it in something that's going to take a very long time and you're going to make 2.5% over the same horizon? So then you can see, obviously, you've got very, very different monthly returns or time-adjusted returns on different sorts of UA spend. And then, of course, you've got this convexity issue. So basically, it's around the shape of the curve. So actually, if you wanted to be a lot more financially astute about how you look at this, you actually use a financial metric called IRR, internal rate of return. You might have heard that's how VCs calculate their fund returns. Most fund managers do it, and you can do exactly the same with cohorts. So anyone investing money in UA is just basically like an investment manager, but the only thing in their portfolio is a bunch of different user cohorts. You can price them and you can measure them using a financial lens of IRR. Slightly beyond the scope of today. Fortunately for you guys, we've spent loads of time and effort creating a whole suite of financial calculators on our website, Pollen VC. Under a calculator section, the one that gets a huge amount of traffic is a free-to-play metrics calculator that allows you to visualize metrics, put in retention, ARPDAU, acquisition costs. It'll build you lifetime value curves. It will model cash flows. It will show you, the impact. It's all super dynamic. So as you adjust your retention, it's going to redraw the curves and help you hopefully figure a bunch of stuff out. So in terms of look at like how you calculate monthly ROI, it's a super simple metric. You look at the profit, hopefully, that you're making, which is your LTV minus your acquisition cost. You then look at the lifetime ROI, which is the profit divided by the acquisition cost. And then all you're doing is basically you're expressing that. So you divide it by the number of days and multiply it by 30, right? So you're just looking to get this, what am I making on a monthly basis for your comparison? So of course, back to the idea of what sort of games we're gonna make. The problem and why loads of people are just getting out of hyper casual or just finding it too difficult. It's a little bit like being an indie musician, right? There's very good reason why VCs don't fund promising up and coming musicians, right? Because it's a hits business. And for a very long time, gaming was considered a hits business as well until about 2019, 2020, until loads of money started flooding into gaming content. It was all about sort of top line growth. They weren't really looking into the numbers. But so hyper casual is kind of like it's a falling star now. But it's this question of velocity. You can't create enough hits unless you're like Ed Sheeran. You can't do hit after hit that you just know is going to be go to the top of the charts. And then the other thing we've seen is these super capital intensive games, right? The ones that require so much cash to get them up into the market. So, looking at, I cast my mind back to a press announcement around Metacore in Finland. So Metacore had raised something like, I think the figure was like $11 or $12 million of equity. And they had Supercell as an investor, who obviously know exactly what they're doing. But rather than raise loads and loads more equity, they announced, and it was in TechCrunch, you can Google it, Supercell Metacore TechCrunch. You'll see that Supercell gave them $180 million credit line, right? So after 11 invested in equity, they gave them this massive credit line that they could draw on so they could scale without having to dilute their equity, right? So it's kind of good for everyone. Supercell makes a return. They make, they're capital efficient. Like the founders keep more. Supercell don't have to put it in as equity. All good. And that was a smart way to do it, because most people would just go and raise, a big, Series B, Series C, or whatever they want to call it from different venture funds, dilute themselves massively and unnecessarily, chuck it into user acquisition. So a really, really inefficient way to deploy capital. And of course, VCs now are much less interested in doing that. Some of them have raised so much money that the ticket size has to go up because they can't make 200 different $500,000 investments. That's a dry powder problem for the VC funds, not really your problem. So one of the things you need to think about as well is how much cash do I actually need? So when you're doing your planning, I mean, you could need very, very little cash if you've got some hyper casual hits factory, because the velocity is so fast, right? You're earning money, you're getting your money back in a few days. You have a credit facility, you can scale that without any meaningful equity whatsoever. Versus the profile where you go so cash negative for so long. In order to spend any meaningful amount of money, you have to have millions, tens of millions to actually do it properly, which is why a lot of these sort of super long, and not long LTV games per se, that's good, but games where it takes you an extraordinarily long period of time to break even, definitely kind of out of vogue. So let's look at it. This is actually based off a real life example. I've changed the numbers to protect the innocent a little bit. But this was a student I met that said, we want to debt finance all of our user acquisition spend. I'm like, great, this is music to my ears. Unfortunately, they were in soft launch, and they had sales of like a few $1,000s, less than $5,000 a month, and their target. So they wanted to spend 100,000 a day. They thought in order to get this thing up to the charts, to get into the halo effect of being in the top 10 and the rest of it, the necessary spend was going to be $100,000 a day, and they were forecasting, which was, I think hugely optimistic, that the cohorts would break even at day 270. So 9 months before any dollar invested was going to actually return. So their question is like, hey, I want to do this, and can you guys help us do it? And I rephrased that question back at the guys and said, basically off no collateral, they wanted to spend $27 million of someone else's money before their first cohort was expected to break even, and everything was dependent on that day 270 metric. And so and how you finance it is how you finance it. You could go and raise 27 million bucks from a VC and he'll take half your company, or you can raise it through debt, or you can raise it, however you do it. That's not so much the thing. The point was, it's a huge amount of money to scale any type of game that has this long LTV genre. And I think a lot of people, when the market was super frothy, were just thinking, oh, I can just go and raise tens of millions of dollars from anyone because I've got the puzzle game and they're the latest thing that are getting sold. So it's hugely capital intensive. So then you look at your spectrum of different options, right? So you've figured out your Goldilocks strategy. You've got your game that's got a reasonable break-even period and how you're going to fund yourself. So of course you look at venture capital, and actually any decent company is going to have a mix of VC funding and other sources in there. But it's a lot harder to raise. Early stage VC money, there's still plenty around, right? The funds were raised, and good ideas are always good ideas regardless of market cycles, right? So there are good projects will always get funded regardless of time in the cycle. You may get a higher valuation, lower valuation, but good stuff will get funded. The next thing we see, and this is like factoring's more sort of traditional financing mechanism. Revenue-based loans are something that was kind of seemed very big for a while. There were people like Pipe and Uncapped and Clearco that were raising huge amounts of money, and they had this model that it was basically, we'll give you some money, you put it into user acquisition, and we'll take a skim until we've been paid back with a fixed fee on top. So they tried to disguise lending as not lending. But most of these guys, it may have been quite popular in SaaS and e-commerce, but most of these guys have just got out because, and if you look at, founders of Pipe, founders of Clearco, all exited, all moved aside, departed the business, and they brought in like credit fund managers and stuff to run them. To my mind, it's like giving someone a bunch of casino chips, going to the casino, hoping they're good at programming UA or programming roulette tables, whatever, and then standing by the door hoping to get repaid on the way out. These were often unsecured, non-collateralized, and I think there's a very good reason why most of that world has just died. The next, you can go to banks. So you can do an AR facility, which is basically a line of credit against receivables. So it's the money you've earned but not yet been paid. But the problem with bank facilities is you typically have to have venture capital. You have to be over $1 million a month in revenues, and they're also really lagged. They're at least a month in arrears because they're verified on bits of paper. And venture debt, very often raised alongside venture capital, but typically it's a term loan that amortizes or is repaid, if you like, over 3, 4, 5 years. So if you want something for financing user acquisition, you don't want to repay half the loan by the time you need the money. So it just doesn't really fit. Publishers, obviously, this is a very kind of like the publisher spectrum is a really gray one in terms of when is a publisher, not a publisher. One of the things we did see recently is a well-known publisher who was offering quote unquote UA financing. And when I asked what the effective interest rate was of this UA financing, they didn't know. It was a simple fixed fee. When we mapped out what the actual cost of money was, it was 115%. So this is exactly my point around developers, frankly, getting hosed, not understanding financial products, which is why we build all the calculators and have a real sort of thing around transparency. Lastly, the thing that we do, non-bank revolving credit, which is basically because we really understand our business. We used to be developers before this, and the source of credit facilities we provide are daily re-verified of all of your receivables, but also an estimate of the residual value of your existing cohorts. So not money to acquire new cohorts, but lending against cohorts you've already acquired. So this we think is a good fit from both sides. It's lower risk for us and it's lower risk for the studio. It's a way to fail. But the point here is there's lots of different options if you look, but understanding them and getting the fit for purpose as well as the cost is super important. So I was thinking, again, bringing back the sort of, the different analogies, and really being a mobile game founder feels a lot like being a farmer, right? This idea over genre. So you can think about, okay, what kind of game studio are you? What kind of farmer are you? So I'm thinking about back to my hyper casual idea. So you're basically a salad green farmer, right? Your crop gets to market so quickly. Doesn't require a huge amount of water, i.e. UA spend. It gets to market and within 7 days or 14 days, whatever. And if your crop fails, you know about it pretty quickly. You can move on and farm something else, right? So super short, not massive returns, but the velocity is really quick. And then you look at the other end. Actually, this was the longest crop I could find. And actually, I think it's more of a 2-year crop. So it's more like a puzzle game. So sugarcane. So let's think about being a sugarcane founder. So you plant your sugarcane, and after, sorry if there's any farmers in the audience, real farmers in the audience, but let's say after 360 days and a shitload of water, you first get the green shoots coming up, right? So this is ROAS break even. And then you've got another year before you can actually harvest it. You could have droughts, floods, disease, war, anything that could throw those metrics off. So takeaway, what kind of crop do you want to grow? Be realistic with a benchmark, particularly don't overestimate super long dated metrics like your long-term retention, because that can throw your numbers off massively. And then whether you use MROI or you use IRR, whatever, use a time-based metric to measure your user acquisition returns. And number one piece of advice, work with your finance team, right? If you have a finance team, work together to figure this stuff out. Both functions within a gaming studio need to spend time understanding each other's business, which is when you get the best outcomes. So that was it from me. I just seen the 0 minutes flash up as well. So it's time to do perfection. Probably got a couple of minutes for any. I know we had some time, so I don't know.
Yeah. At least we can get 5 minutes for your questions. So.
Thank you for your presentation. How much does it take for what? No, I will rephrase my question. What's the difference with PC games based and mobile one? Is venture capital and is different, or it's nearly the same?
So there is a lot more interest. I moderated a VC panel of 5 equity investors in Limassol a couple of weeks ago, and all of them were traditional mobile, And all of them said, oh no, we're widening. Cross-platform was very important, right? So whether, I don't know, whether it's PC, I mean, mobile is harder because of the UA costs, okay? So lots of them, whether it was saying, no one was saying, I'm done with mobile, I want to invest in PC games. But they were definitely widening out into cross-platform. So this is, I mean, there is, I think, an increasing amount of venture capital for equity investment opportunities around PC games. People have seen some games be extremely successful and make very good long-term franchises. The amounts of money are a lot higher. User acquisition is more difficult though, right? You don't have that traditional Facebook or Google attribution link, but you know, maybe in a way that's a good thing. But there's definitely lots of interest in PC games. In terms of raising debt financing for PC games, we get asked about it a lot, but I don't think we've ever done it, because you might have long payment cycles from from Sony or Steam or whoever, but you don't have this sort of, well, the reason I need the money is to reinvest back into more Steam ads for my game or whatever, right? That sort of loop, that triangulation doesn't really happen in PC gaming in nearly the same way as it does. So, whilst we would love to lend against, Google, Sony receivables or Microsoft receivables, we don't do it. It's not to say we couldn't do it. The reason to raise that would just be like a working capital facility, right? So there's not such a direct case in terms of debt. But I think from a venture capital, from an equity investment point of view, there's as much or more interest in PC and console as there has been at any time in the last 5 years.
Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. I wonder, at which stage in a company do you get involved? Like, does the product need to be already go-to-market? I have in the go-to-marmarket stage, or would you invest like in a seed, like still development phase, or where do you get in? Like,
so for us, like there has to be, as we're a lender, so there has to be collateral, right? So it's basically in in the stage where their company is revenue generating. Ideally, I mean, we're actually ticking up the numbers a little bit. So ideally, we're looking for something over maybe 100 or 200,000 a month in revenues. But the most important thing, it has positive unit economics, right? So if you figured out a formula that you can put $1 in and get $1.50 back in 6 months or whatever, what happens is it just becomes a question of, where can I find capital to put into this machine, right? But the hardest thing is getting the machine to work in the first place, right? Unfortunately, 9 out of 10 will, because the ad costs are so high, will just not be able to make a game that you can, make a positive ROAS from users.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Martin. I was wondering, like, have you seen then, obviously when you find a level and you say you have 150 ROAS, then you can, spend a bit money on it. Do you see that there's then like a certain level of scale where typically then that flats out? So let's say then if you pour, you had an example of 100K a day. So if you pour $1 million a day, so how do you guys have any ways of measuring how sort of sustainable the actual levels of the ROAS ROI is?
It's a very good question. I mean, the answer is sadly not. Probably wouldn't be standing here if we did, right? So there is a certain amount of, like, in a way, they want to make the auction system of the ads very transparent. My personal views is quite a lot of opacity, because they're very good at, the ad platforms are very good at knowing the LTVs of the games. And so they're very also keen to take most of the cash off the table, leaving you maybe just a little bit of opportunity to make money. But controversial one to try and prove. The thing is, it's basically about demand and supply, right? So if you have a very, very narrow focus game, then obviously you're going to target through the ad platforms your super loyal users, because they all kind of flock to that character or whatever. And then you go out in concentric circles from there. So you've got, the shape of your demand and supply curves could be super steep, right? All this is, by the way, mobile acquisition is just demand and supply. It's economics 101. The more you pay, the more it's going to go up over time. And then the less your users are going to pay out, the more users you have. So What you don't know is whether you've got, I mean, in a broad market, you'll have like fairly flat demand and supply curves. And in a narrow niche market, you're going to have quite aggressive, steep demand supply curves. Unlike economic theory, these are not straight lines that are drawn that never change. These are totally dynamic. They're changing every day, every minute, because there is, you know, theoretically a live auction system for that. So it's very difficult to know. The thing that you obviously have to do is not just like set and forget. You don't say, I'm going to spend 100 grand a day and I'm going to go on holiday for a month and come back and see if it's working, right? Absolutely not. You're checking this stuff intraday. You have as good metrics, attribution as far as that's possible, all the rest of it. So you're keeping a super close eye. You know what's working, what's not. You double down on stuff that's working until it stops. You pull back on stuff that's not working. So you're always driving. The better intelligence you have, the better place to do that. It's like, it's driving blind a little bit. But yeah, you just got to stay on top of the numbers.
Thanks.
Of course.
Yeah, hello, Martin. Thank you for your presentation. And maybe it's a silly question, but for example, if you like investors have ability to create some new market, what kind of market it will be? So because you know,
market in gaming.
Yeah, because for me, most obvious the point, the market that you need to focus on is like casino or something like this, just because they have some real money and so on. And games, you focus on the games mostly because it's go to our lives and everybody have mobile phone, and that's why it's good market for investment. But if imagine you have this kind of superpower to create new market, what kind it will be?
So I'm the wrong guy to ask because I'm not really much of a gamer, but I do have a view nonetheless, right? Just in terms of its empirical view, like I think the idea of just like copying other games is bullshit, right? Just, you know, you see someone making money, you go and try and copy it. There's zero creativity, you know, maybe good execution, good game making, but it's not, you know, okay, people may have got rich on it in the past, but I'm not sure there's much in the future. The thing that seems to be working is mashups of different genres, right? It's another thing that came out in Cyprus a couple of weeks ago. So people doing I mean, look at what you know, Coinmaster did, for example. So that, you know, when you're taking things that you know work, but putting them together in innovative ways. One of the things we see as well a little bit about, you know, games within games, right? So you have sort of, you know, ads that may have a very simple hyper casually type of gameplay, but then you've got this sort of like this Narnia doorway into whole other kingdoms of mid-core, whatever. Part of that's just a user acquisition where you used to kind of think, I'm getting these installs for 20 cents and I'm monetizing the users at $5 in this different world or kingdom, right? I'm sure the ad platforms will catch on to that. But, you know, different things using a bit of, I think one of the things that the whole kind of, you know, ATT, IDFA, blah, blah, people got very lazy before in terms of how they were marketing, attributing stuff. It's forced people to get more creative. On one hand, in terms of the BI and the tools and how they're, you know, how they're doing it. On the other hand, just becoming more creative marketers, right? And it's, you know, you've got the blend of art and science, but, you know, going out and looking for different ways. The thing that gave me the idea for Pollen years ago was having to get creative. It was I'm really showing my age here. It was pre-Facebook install ads, right? It was a music remixing app. We used radio, unsold radio inventory as a way of acquiring users, and it was really effective. We did in one, you know, just in London, within the sort of the orbital motorway within London, we did 30,000 users in 30 days, just from unsold radio ads. And we would give a clip to the radio station out the back of it, so they get something that sort of, you know, gets their users involved. We got a, you know, access of millions of our, you know, target audience, or hundreds of thousands of our target audience. So, but that was done out of necessity. Had Facebook ads, I'd just gone on a few clicks and put my credit card in, I'd have just done that instead. So I think there's a thing of like forcing you to be more creative on the marketing front, but also from a game design, which I'm way less to qualified to talk about, you know, this idea of like genre mashups, right? Certain game styles have been around for hundreds or thousands of years, right? I mean,
Gambling.
you know, I mean, well, yeah, I mean, look, people still play solitaire in Windows 3.1, right? You know, there's a reason for it. So if you can find ways to kind of either bring these and put a new spin on them, whatever, the underlying game mechanic, that's been solved. You don't need to do that. And maybe you sort of mash it up with something else that you see working, or trial different experiments. But you know, again, if I could invent a new game genre, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. But there's my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to ask if you invest into the product and you didn't receive a revenue that you expected, what you will do with such a product? What you next steps?
So we don't. So we don't invest equity. It's only debt. And in terms of investing debt, the idea of, and if you can find someone to do it, you should probably do it, right? I think they're few and far between. Anyone who's going to lend you money and not even take a stake in the business to finish off a game or whatever is probably nuts. You know, without any, you get a little bit of interest and you get none of the upside, and there's a very high chance of it failing. The thing that we do is we do a digital verification of collateral. So collateral that you lend against in any lending business is the money that is sitting there in the bank of Apple or Google or Unity or wherever before it's been paid out. So we just verify that every day, and then you can borrow as much as you need of that. And then also the cohort residuals. But the idea of, like, you know, lending someone money to make a game or finish a game is just madness, basically. Like, investing in equity in a game, of course, you know, but you match up the risk and reward, right? So if you've got like some, you know, you need $1 million to go and make some new genre of game that you just dreamt up, and a mashup of, you know, Yahtzee and Match 3 or something, right? Let's do it. It takes equity. It takes some like money to make that game. Whereas if you said, okay, so this game now 2 years on is basically, it's printing cash and it's making $1 million a month, and you just need more money for user acquisition, and you've got this money that's tied up in the Apple, Google cycle, and maybe some in your residuals. You don't need to give away any of your company, right? Maybe you had to give away 1/3 of your company to raise that $1 million. This way, you just pay a small amount of interest. So our risk is lower, which is why we charge interest rather than take a stake in the company. But it's just matching your risk and reward. So look at the project, look at how the money's going to get deployed, and look at the different sources of capital, right? Which is why you'll never get anyone in their right mind to lend you money to build a game idea that you've got. And why, conversely, founders, and this is another thing really need to recognize, founders who could raise debt to scale their game and keep all their equity, who have gone and given it out to VCs, is also equally bonkers. Because what you're doing is you're giving the venture capital fund an equity return for taking debt risk, right? So they're taking a really small amount of this and getting all the upside. And that's just like real, you know, a lack of financial understanding of the founder. So it's basically like horses for courses, right? Look at what you're funding, look at the best way to fund that given the risk profile.
Thank you.
I think this is more questions than I've ever had in any talk.
Yeah, I also didn't expect it to be so many. So it was quite interesting topic. So thanks, Martin, and thanks everyone for coming to the